Episode 12 of the WildFed podcast, Recovering the Wild Turkey with Kelsey Sullivan, is brought to you by Surthrival. Surthrival's new line of nutraceutically advanced, organically produced CBD products are selling out fast, and that's because they work. The formula is called CBD3 because it's made from 3 CBD extracts combined into one powerful, scientifically validated formula. The first is a nano-delivered CBD that's designed to get into your cells fast. The second's a liposomally delivered CBD that stays in your body substantially longer than other CBD formulas. And the third is a traditionally made broad-spectrum hemp extract with all the benefits of the cannabis plant, minus the THC. CBD3 is studied, lab-tested for purity, and delivers faster results that last longer. Surthrival is so much more than just CBD, so go over to surthrival.com to see the entire lineup. Surthrival is empowerment fuel. For those of you that ordered Season 1 of the WildFed TV show, you received Episode 2 yesterday. That episode's called Forgotten Plants in a Land of Monsters and takes place on both sides of the South Carolina-Georgia border. We harvest a beautiful mature bull alligator on a nuisance tag and learn all about Yopon, North America's only native caffeine-containing plant. We bring those ingredients to Tony Seachrist at his dockside restaurant, The Wild, in Savannah, Georgia, where he prepares alligator for the first time and his bartender mixes up some Yopon cocktails for our hosts and the WildFed crew. It's a really cool episode, and seeing this alligator get broken down and turned into food is very compelling. Not to mention the exploration of what might be the most underutilized wild plant on the continent. You can order Season 1 of the WildFed TV show at wild-fed.com. 2 episodes are available right now, and you'll receive another episode each Monday until all 8 episodes have been released. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed Podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Today's episode, which I think is just awesome, is with wildlife biologist Kelsey Sullivan, who oversees all of Maine's migratory and upland game bird species. We spoke with Kelsey at the end of the spring turkey season, just after wrapping up filming for episode 1 of the WildFed TV show. I wanted to talk with Kelsey about the recovery of the wild turkey in areas where they'd been in the past extirpated due to unmanaged market and subsistence hunting. They're now an incredible and inspiring story of wildlife recovery, which was a joint effort between hunters, biologists, state agencies, NGOs, and other stakeholders. Kelsey's message is an optimistic one, and the interview is extremely eye-opening, especially for people who might be new to how conservation, wildlife biology, and management are conducted. Whether you hunt turkeys, would like to start, or are just fascinated by this incredible bird, I think you'll find this interview to be very satisfying. Next week, we'll be talking to Catherine Schmidt, author of The President's Salmon, an incredible book detailing the natural and life histories of the Atlantic salmon and how the first salmon caught in Maine each year used to be shipped on ice to the White House to be eaten by the president. Then, how their subsequent and precipitous decline due to hydroelectric dams and industrial pollution of their natal rivers led to federal protection under the Endangered Species Act. It's a fascinating story, and you won't want to miss it. For now, enjoy this fantastic interview with Kelsey Sullivan, all about one of my favorite species, the wild turkey. Well, I'm here with Kelsey Sullivan, wildlife biologist with Maine's Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife. Kelsey, thanks so much for your time today. Thanks for being here.
Sure, thanks for having me.
Tell me a little bit about Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, what they do, what the mission is.
Okay, well, I'll try to truncate it down, but to start, there's really 3. When you think of the Department of Inland Fisheries and Wildlife, you should think about there's a wildlife division, there's a fisheries division, and then there's a warden service. So those 3 divisions, I guess, if you will, or bureaus, work together ultimately to protect, enhance Maine's wildlife and fisheries resource. Like I said, to protect and enhance, but also to allow for wise use of those resources. So I guess that's sort of the basics of our department.
And your job as a wildlife biologist, you work with migratory and upland game birds. Tell us a little bit about that, your specialty and how you got involved in that.
Sure. So like you said, I'm the species specialist. I should back up a little bit. So in our wildlife division and our fisheries division, there's what we call regional offices, and right now we're sitting in Region A, the gray office.
Beautiful building.
Yep. So within those regions, there's either a wildlife biologist or fisheries biologist, 2 or 3, depending on the region. There's 7 regions in the state. And they're really the guys and gals that are on the ground sort of the day in, day out, responding to wildlife issues, but also researching wildlife and sort of within their region, focusing on the management actions that are laid out by our plans, but also, for example, if you have an eagle that's injured on the highway or something like that, a wildlife biologist may respond.
Oh, so there's like emergency response.
Well, yeah, I mean it's and they work directly with the Warden Service, because the Warden Service really gets those calls more than the Wildlife Division, but they work together. Say there's an exotic snake or something like that in Millinocket or something, and it needs to be removed from taken from possession because it's illegal. You will have a biologist go in with a warden and take care of getting that snake out safely for everybody. So they do deer collection data and stuff like that. So they call them the jack of all trades of wildlife.
Okay.
I guess is the best way to think of it. So those are the 7 regions, and they go from southern Maine to northern Maine. But then there's the research section, which I'm in, research and assessment section. So those are where the species specialists, like the moose biologist, the deer biologist, reptile invertebrate.
And there's one per region, or do you represent the whole state?
Per state.
So you are migratory. You are migratory and upland game birds for the state.
Yep.
Wow.
So
that's cool.
my duty is to monitor and to research those specific species, the game birds, working in coordination with the regions and other contractors and other biologists. So, I'm sort of the program leader, but people in the regions help me too.
How many species does that end up being that you're sort of responsible for overseeing or being involved in the management of?
Well, let's see. Over 40,
Wow.
if you count all the duck species that interact with Maine at some point in their life cycle.
That's something I wanted to ask about, actually. So you have some species which Maine regulates fully under their own jurisdiction.
Yep.
Because they're non-migratory, right? So that would be like our grouse,
Yep.
our turkeys. But then when it comes to waterfowl, like the geese and ducks that come here,
Yep.
They would be also federally managed. How does that component work?
Yeah, you think of it like an umbrella. So the federal government sort of has an overarching mandate and authority to manage and conserve and to use migratory species. So they set sort of general frameworks like for season lengths and bag limits based on a range-wide or say flyway-wide population level. And then states have to you can't be more liberal in your seasons outside of the federal framework. So for example, if you have the federal government says the duck season is going to be 60 days this year with a 6-bird limit, Maine can't have a 70-day, obviously.
But they could go shorter.
But you could go shorter if if your wood duck population looks like it's
Right.
not doing well at the statewide level. So that's sort of the basics. It's a migratory species are ultimately overarching, managed by the federal government, but you can, based on your state numbers and concerns, you can restrict that more, I guess.
And tell me about your background. How'd you get into wildlife as science? And then do you have a background in ornithology, or did you come into this through another route? Because I see that your work going back even to the days you were in Alaska was related to migratory birds.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so my early years, I guess, struggling through college and trying to figure out what to do with my life. I went from social thought and political economy to
no kidding
to forestry and then ultimately, and this goes back to what you're exposed to as a kid. My mom was a big birder, and she was an artist, and she did artwork for field guides.
Oh wow.
But she was always taking us out, and so
but
anyway,
you had field guides lying around the house.
Yeah,
then?
field guides and birds and paying attention to the environment.
Yeah.
So I mentioned that because that's when I got into undergraduate school, and then I was exposed to ornithology. So I started moving towards natural resources, took ornithology, and that just sort of, I was like, oh, that's that's kind of what I want to be involved with, because it's just birds are diverse. They're very different adaptations. They're migratory. They go all over the world from northern Alaska down to Antarctica. So anyway, that's sort of what started me on this bird research route. And then I went to undergraduate school in University of Maine, Massachusetts Amherst, and the only thing I wanted to do when I got out was go to Alaska. So I put a bunch of applications out.
What was the draw for you to Alaska?
I had a friend that was there for a couple of years, and he just had really cool stories and experiences, and just the vast, wildness of it. So that was my motivation: graduate from college and just get to Alaska somehow and spend some time up there. So I ended up volunteering for a project that was looking at natural resource damage assessment following the Exxon Valdez oil spill, and they were working on different top predator. They call it the Apex project. So looking at top predator biology, reproduction, and survival, because they were affected by lower trophic influences of the oil spill itself.
Were you looking at bioaccumulation, or were you looking at...
Not initially. It was just population biology, reproduction, survival.
But to see if they were impacted by the impacts on animals that are lower on the trophic level. So would they be affected because some of those animals were in lower numbers, or because those animals had been like what kind of impacts did it cause?
So there was direct exposure to oil. From
must be also the oil cleanup chemicals as well. I would
oil
assume.
Cleanup too. For example, I was focused on bird species. There was fisheries projects. There was seal projects, otter projects. So they were all species that ate the lower trophic level. Fish were their primary food source. Herring. There was a herring crash, but there was also intertidal remnants of oil, even 10 years after. Because I actually didn't go up there until 10 years after the spill.
Oh, okay. So you were seeing what it was like a decade later.
So there was species like black oyster catchers. They forage in the intertidal invertebrates and things like that are filtering toxic oil still, or at the time, 10 years after. So we were looking at how they were reproducing, how they were surviving, because they were eating in their intertidal. So that's sort of what I was involved in.
I'm curious, the first place my mind goes when I hear about it is wondering, for human beings who are part of that food web, who maybe live along the flyway zone for some of those migratory birds, do you think that people who have hunted and eaten birds who've had that exposure have been impacted by that at all, or is that something you'd comment on? You got to think of it in terms of timing too, because species that people would have been hunting probably weren't arriving yet, because this was in late March. So that's interesting.
Waterfowl that people would hunt in the fall hadn't really arrived and weren't exposed to that oil long enough.
The initial oil, yeah.
So I think human consumption, the species that were, directly affected, bioaccumulation, I don't think was really a timely, pertinent issue.
Yeah.
It was more the wildlife that actually directly ate those lower trophic species, like the intertidal mussels and snails. Or another example is the orca.
Yep.
They eat herring and other seals. That seals eat herring, and they actually didn't raise young for 18 years after the spill,
due to lack of calories that they needed.
Stress, exactly.
Wow.
Yep.
Okay.
So their physical fitness, their condition wasn't par enough to.
Yeah.
And Prince William Sound has a resident orca population, and so there's residents and transients. The ones that live in Prince William Sound, which is 100 miles by 100 miles, they didn't raise young for, I think it was 18 years after the spill.
No kidding.
Yep.
I've never heard that.
But they're long enough. Fortunately, they're long enough lived that those individuals that were exposed lived long enough that now they are raising young and they're passing on their genes. So
that's really fascinating.
It's pretty interesting. So
when you coming away from that work there, did it leave you feeling optimistic or pessimistic about the crossroads where human reclamation, environmental reclamation, and the environment and habitat's ability to sort of self-clean and regulate?
Yep.
Or did you walk away feeling like, sometimes these things happen and the environment cleans itself up well and people do a good job? Or did you walk away going, wow, this is a disaster that's going to last a lot longer than the headlines?
I walked away with optimism.
Wow.
And like I think you basically captured it, is that, and we saw this in the Gulf spill. There was self-cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
It's definitely a negative effect, but fortunately for Prince William Sound and places like the Gulf, it seems like nature is really able to filter through, and if there's enough time. But so I guess optimistic that I don't really have a good knowledge of the cleanup and how that affected things directly. I know there was people panicked and kind of got out and started spraying rocks that had oil, and they ended up just destroying that intertidal community because of that. And there may have been a better way to do it. So we may have slowed the process a little bit, or
exacerbated the damage a little bit in some cases.
In some respects, but gleaning oil directly off the surface of the water was definitely a benefit. So that's something that I think people helped with in their cleanup.
And so after your time in Alaska,
Yep.
what kind of happened next in the journey that led you to where you're sitting right now?
The journey has a lot to do with family.
Yeah.
My wife and I actually worked up in Alaska for 10 years together, and 7 years into it, we had a son. Raymond is his name, and so we had him up there, and we were in the field like 4, 5, 6 months out of the time.
She's a biologist as well?
Yep, she's a biologist. She's a teacher now at
Specializing
Unity
in what?
College. Seabird ecology is her sort of primary interest and expertise. So anyway, we, living in field camps and tents and on boats and that kind of stuff in the winter and the summertime takes its toll on trying to be a family and going. We were actually going back and forth 8 months up in Alaska, 4 months in actually your neck of the woods, Albany Township.
Okay.
So that sort of okay, it's time to pick a state and stay there. And it was either Maine or Alaska. So my family,
one corner, the other corner.
Yep. My wife Allie and myself were both from the Northeast, so it was sort of a no-brainer.
And you got involved here with inland fisheries and wildlife. And did you go straight into this position you're in now?
I did, yeah. So I applied to several positions, knowing that I wanted to kind of transition into staying in Maine year-round, and I eventually got this position. And so the question is, how did I get involved with becoming the game bird specialist? And it was my background in bird work, survey work of all species, because we did marine mammal and bird surveys, which included waterfowl. So there was some background in waterfowl surveys and just the basic fundamentals of being a wildlife biologist. I had bird experience handling and banding, and I do a lot of capture and banding and things like that. So I really didn't have a game bird specific tract in school or experience, but in the broad sense of bird biology and wildlife biology specific to birds, I had that experience. So that's how I got in the door here. Yep.
And what is at this point in your career, what's your sort of day-to-day work responsibilities look like, and how much is in the field? How much? Yep. I mean, I've seen your name now on the wild turkey management plan, for instance. So I imagine you got a quite a bit of desk time as well.
Oh, sure.
But what's your work responsibilities look like now?
Yep. So it varies annually or over the course of the year, but people always ask about how much time you spend in the field versus the office. I'm about 50% in the field, 50% in the office.
Oh, that's nice.
But it could be, I could have a month of office work to stretch, and then, another 2 months of. So what I'm doing right now is I'm tracking turkeys for our this research project we're working on for turkeys. We've been tagging females with radio transmitters and following them through their nesting season to get an idea of timing of nesting. You'll call phenology, which is related to our season setting, and then survival and reproduction. So I've been out in the field 1 or 2 times a week down in Gorham tracking. I brought this. I know you can't see it, but this is a receiver and a transmitter here.
I'm looking right at this piece of equipment now, and it reminds me of it looks sort of like a 1980s, house antenna almost connected to a radio.
Right. Yep.
So how and where are they tagged? Like where on their body are they tagged?
Yep. So
this is one of the tags here.
This is the transmitter.
Okay.
Yep. And
So we're looking at a matchbox sized transmitter with a probably
antenna.
16-inch antenna or so on it.
So this is a FM frequency telemetry, and this actually goes on the wing. It's like a backpack. So you can't see it because actually a predator chewed off the backpack.
Oh, you recovered this.
This
from
is a
kill.
recovered from a mortality. So there's loops that go around, and the wings basically slide in. So she's actually carrying it like a backpack.
And the antenna points down toward her tail, or up?
It's kind of free, so it kind of floats.
Yeah.
And then this has a magnet on it. It's off right now.
Like I've worked with telemetry on hunting dogs, and so I think it's similar, right? With that magnet moved, it doesn't transmit anymore.
Yep. So this is on. We actually had 54 hens between. We have 2 study areas. Newport to Milford, Old Town area is one study area, and the other study area is Gorham, Wyndham area because of the high density of turkeys down here. But we had going into the early spring, we had 54 birds with transmitters, and we've actually lost a few to predators since then.
I've got so many questions about that, but I want to stay. I'll come back to it because I want to stay in order here.
So just I'll summarize my duties. So field work right now is turkey work, tracking transmitters. I've been doing woodcock surveys and grouse surveys, so that's just part of the annual monitoring of population levels. And woodcock is migratory, so it's a federal. So there's actually a survey statewide and nationwide, or range-wide, because they're east of the Mississippi, where the federal government coordinates what they call
That's where the range and distribution of woodcock ends, is that the Mississippi roughly?
There's sort of either side of the Appalachian Mountains.
Okay.
There's a central management unit we call, and an eastern management unit. So, but beyond the west of the Mississippi, you really don't find American woodcock or other woodcock, I guess. But so there's a coordinated survey by the federal government where it's called a singing ground survey, where males sing at night. So if you count the number of males,
hear them out the bedroom window.
So people hear them all the time. They're really cool.
Yeah.
But we have 54 transects in Maine specifically, and then other states have transects. So we do surveys of those in the spring. And then I'll transition into goose banding in July.
Okay. Of Canada geese?
Of Canada geese, which you guys should come out for that.
Oh, I would absolutely love that. Yeah.
But so that's getting bans on birds prior to the hunting season, so you can monitor annual harvest rates, and then in turn set your bag limits and seasons in basically a sustainable level. So that's done every year. Right before the hunting season, not only in Maine but across the country for geese and ducks.
A couple quick digressions here.
Sure.
One, just in a sentence, like how are woodcock doing? I don't hear much about them. I hear about so many other species. It's not one I hear a lot about.
Woodcock are actually, over the long term, there's been a slight steady decline of woodcock, and it's attributed, if you talk to woodcock biologists across the country, it's attributed to habitat loss.
Mm-hmm. I imagine hunting in Maine does not have a significant impact on populations.
Yeah, and you probably know the concept of compensatory versus additive mortality, where compensatory mortality is birds that are taken from hunting would likely have been killed from other causes. So there's a certain level of accepted mortality with hunting. If it becomes additive if the level of hunting is increased beyond what natural mortality would have happened. So for woodcock, there's a relatively low harvest or low level of mortality from hunting compared to all the other factors.
I don't meet many folks who are out there woodcock hunting in any serious way. You must be more connected to it. Is there much culture for it? It seems like more rough grouse hunters who sort of take some woodcock.
It's like a few thousand people sort of dedicated to it. And really, when you people that woodcock hunt, it's not like they're out there every day.
Right.
It's sort of a couple weekends in the fall kind
Right.
of thing. So the level of actual hunting interest for woodcock is pretty low in Maine and in most other states. Yep.
All right, then I got 2 other questions, and I'm going to swing us back on track. They're going to seem like I'm going off the rails here. But next question is, I keep driving by a sandhill crane on a drive that I do, and I'm going, what is going on here with this bird? Are there breeding populations here? Are they moving into this area?
Yep, it's been what they call range expansion.
Cool.
So we have, I think, at least a dozen documented nests that are successly reproducing in Maine. So.
Oh, that's fascinating.
Yep.
Have you seen much of that over the course of your career where there's those kind of range expansions?
I've seen really the sandhill crane. I remember when I started in 2008, I was on a waterfowl brood survey in Sandy Point and Prospect, which is just west of the Bucksport Narrows Bridge. And I saw one individual sandhill crane, and then a couple of years later there was reports. So that's actually pretty recent, the sandhill crane reproduction. So I think that's sort of the notable one.
I whipped my car over just going like, what am I looking at there? I saw that sort of orange-red crest
cool.
that they have.
Yep.
Yeah, it's neat to see that.
So.
The other sort of off-topic thing that I just want to hit on, being the time of year it is here in Maine, is your pro tip on, I guess, dealing with biting insects. Are you spending as much time as you do in the field in Maine? We're not like out west where we got like all that wide exposure and wind blowing. I mean, we have insects here that just would shock a lot of people. Do you wear nets? Are you wearing bug spray? How are you dealing with that when you're out there?
Bug spray.
Yeah.
Yep. And we're actually using permethrin.
Yep. Okay, so you're onto the new
ticks.
stuff.
Yep. And that seems to be pretty effective.
Does the department have a lot of issues with Lyme disease, or is that been something that's happened to tick-borne illnesses and stuff?
Yeah, there's been. I mean, like anybody, any folks population that's in the
spends
field.
time out there. Yeah.
We've had some incidences of. We had a regional biologist had a tick-borne illness last year. So the department actually issues us clothing that's treated with permethrin.
Oh yeah, impregnated. Yeah.
Yep. So we were.
And that's working for you guys.
Yep. It definitely seems to work. So. But yeah, good old bug spray is my go-to. I mean, I've tried other things like Skin So Soft and lemongrass and stuff like that.
Maybe if you're hanging out on the lawn a little bit, but it's pretty fierce out there. Huh?
Yep. So.
Okay, so circling back around to turkeys, maybe we could back up. We've just come through our turkey hunt here in Maine, right? What is it? The final day yet? Is it the 4th?
Past Saturday.
Saturday. So we've just come through the end of our turkey season. We had a somewhat successful hunt, I'd say, this year. This was my 3rd year harvesting turkeys. I've been harvesting both spring and fall hunts.
Yep.
I think growing up, I had seen turkeys as far back as I remember. You know, I'd see turkeys, although maybe not as many as I'm seeing now. I'm not sure, but. More probably because I was more urban when I was younger and have progressively kind of made my way more into the countryside. I did not grow up understanding that there was like a time where turkeys were largely extirpated from a lot of their range. So if we could back up a little bit and kind of go through the storyline of maybe, you know, and I don't know how far back your sense of it goes, but let's say we were talking about European contact at that time, let's say. Do we have any sense of what the wild turkey population would have been like then compared to today?
Right. The sense would be that it was lower, I think, if you think of it per square mile.
Yep.
And when you think of wildlife, you really have to kind of think about habitat and and the available habitat. And what turkeys thrive in is a combination of mature forests and open field.
Which there would have been a lot less of.
A lot less before European contact.
Right.
Yep. So that's just based on the concept of wildlife.
So like our
habitat.
deer, they would have been here, but they would have been they've been advantaged by some of the clearing that we've done and the way that we've created a lot more edge habitat.
And not to get too far off track, but when we think about woodcock populations, they thrive better in open habitat and younger forest. So when you think about it's interesting to think about how turkeys sort of their habitat complete clearing of the forests post European contact and so forest clearing was one reason why their numbers started to to go down, plus overhunting. But so they didn't have that combination of mature open field as what they would have needed. So, but woodcock thrive better at open younger stage forests. So when we talk about woodcock and the slow decline of the numbers, we may be coming to what would have been sort of a
actual normal numbers on the landscape,
because it's see, especially in southern Maine, the fields are going up and there's less habitat for woodcock. So
it's fascinating how a person's perception is not historical, but is based on their own life experience, right? So it could be like, oh, the numbers really seem down, but they could be normal numbers, and your sense of it was based on abnormal numbers, or vice versa.
Yep.
I hear a lot of people talking about in the reverse as well. So it seems like people's own lifetime doesn't always include the historical context. But okay, so let's say with turkeys.
So turkeys.
Then you have the massive changes to the landscape over time.
Yep.
And turkeys, I'm sure took advantage of that. But what led to the real precipitous declines? You were saying overhunting before, and I'm curious if it was subsistence hunting, or if we were talking about market hunting.
Market hunting.
Okay.
But just
general subsistence hunting as well.
But so unregulated hunting really pushed them over the edge. So
because at that time, it's not. I mean, a lot of people have lived now in an era of highly regulated hunting with licensing and tags and all of these bag limits and such. But a lot of the older generation around here seems to recount to me times where it was kind of a free-for-all to some degree, whether I don't know what laws were in place then, if people just weren't yet following them like they do today. I imagine
1986 was the first regulated hunt, which was prior to that it would have been illegal to take turkeys,
Prior to 1986 in Maine, there was no turkey season.
There was no turkey season. But prior to 1977, there were no wild turkeys in Maine, actually.
Okay, that's what I want to get to next. So Maine would have had turkeys historically, right?
Yep.
And then overhunting, unregulated hunting led to the extirpation of the bird. I mean, they weren't here at all, or essentially they were gone.
The term extirpated was here once and then non-existent after a certain point, which would have been early 1800s.
Wow.
is the number that I've seen.
At that point, that was when the last birds were sort of pushed out of the air.
Yep.
Now, this isn't just true of Maine, though. This was a lot of the country was like this, right?
Yep. And places like Vermont, West Virginia, I think, places that, if you think about clear, because it was habitat change too. It was unregulated hunting and then complete loss of forest, so which is what they need in combination with open fields. Places like Vermont, West Virginia that had these sort of valleys and nooks where there was a remnant forest, intact forest where they could roost and be in protection, were sort of the holdouts for turkeys.
Okay.
So that's those. I think Vermont still had birds that following that extirpation that we experienced. So there were some source populations that we could actually
we drew on to bring here.
Yep.
And so did I read that was? I'm testing my memory here. Did I read that was 1947 that they started bringing? When did they start?
So there's a little bit of history. So when post-World War II, and the Pittman-Robertson Act, which you're probably familiar with, the excise tax on firearms.
Give a short little summation of that for people listening.
Yep, I think it was 1937. The Pittman-Robertson Act was enacted by Congress to take 11% an 11% tax off of the sale of firearms that went directly to wildlife
and also
conservation.
some hunting equipment as well, right? Not just firearms.
And then there's a whole fisheries
side of it too.
I think it's Dingle Johnson.
Yep.
So that was now there's a source of money for conservation based on that excise tax.
I find it interesting because nationally, without even taking a stance on the politics, watching it from the outside, so much conversation right now about firearms and the legality of firearms and how they should be regulated. No conversation in the mainstream media about how we'll fund wildlife when so much money annually, because it's not just hunting guns, right? As I understand it, if you were to go buy a self-defense pistol, still about 11% of that is going into feeding the wildlife fund. So it's an interesting component that I think a lot of people who are maybe anti-gun but very pro-wildlife haven't considered.
Right.
And it would be interesting to see the willingness for them to say, oh, no, tax our backpacks and North Face tents and such. You know what I mean? Because that is 11% is pretty significant when you're not used to it.
Yeah, exactly. So
But so anyway, so you were saying.
So you said 1947. Following the World War II, there was more revenue or more money for wildlife agencies because our agency is 75% funded by this Pittman Robertson Act.
70. Inland Fisheries and Wildlife is 70% funded by Pittman Robertson.
I'm really excited to announce that our WildFed hats are now available. You know, your hat is more than just a fashion accessory. It's one of your most important pieces of hunting and fishing equipment. Your hat shields your eyes from the sun on the landscape and glare out on the water, improving your visibility and your ability to see what you're looking for. I wasn't really a hat person before I became serious about marksmanship, hunting, and fishing. In fact, I pretty much avoided ball caps altogether. Now I never go into the field without one. It's simply too important of a piece of equipment. Visually scanning the landscape or shooting under high sun without a hat brim is very frustrating. Fishing without a hat is nearly an exercise in futility, but finding a hat you love can be just as frustrating. WildFed's low-profile, trucker-style snapback hats are clean, simple, and classy. The woven label reads, WildFed. Food is all around you. We did one in a color they call Loden, which to me is really like a muted grayish green. I chose it because it blends in when I'm out in the field, but it's right at home in urban environments too. We're also offering a limited release in Hunter Orange since most states and provinces require you to wear at least an orange hat during the firearm season for big game, making it a perfect companion on your hunts or just to keep you or your family safe out on the landscape during the hunting season. Again, these are extremely high-quality, structured, trucker-style snapback hats, and you can find them at wild-fed.com. Go over there and have a look.
So in other words, the money spent by hunters on equipment, firearms, ammunition, etc., funds 70% of Maine's inland. Wow.
Right, and then the rest is state money that we actually have to match.
Where's that coming from? Is that coming from licensing?
Licensing, the loon plate is one thing.
Okay.
Chickadee checkoff, things like that. But so when you mentioned 1947, there was an interest in restoring turkeys in Maine and other states, and for about 20 years, is what I read and folks have told me about, is game farm turkeys was sort of the approach. So raise turkeys in captivity from game farm source, and then release them into the wild. But they just didn't have
genetically that. These were domesticated birds. Or
they were. They had the genetics of wild turkeys. They're game farm raised wild turkey source. So, but they didn't have that exposure to the wild, and they just didn't do well. So
and they are heavily preyed upon, even the wild birds, right?
Yep.
So I mean, I imagine if you haven't been used to duck and predators your whole life.
So it took a while to figure out that we really needed wild stock, pure wild stock, to release into Maine, the habitat. So 1977 was the first actual successful reintroduction and establishment of a turkey population in Maine.
And it only took 9 years from that to having a hunting season.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Yeah,
it's incredible. Yep. That's due to the fecundity of the bird.
Oh yeah, they're pretty.
Wow.
Pretty efficient in surviving and raising young. So there was 40 birds from Vermont in 1977, and then an additional 71 birds came. I think it's actually 40 from Pennsylvania, 71. So 111 birds were actually brought into the state to what we have now is greater than 60,000 birds. So
that's just really incredible to hear that.
Yep.
It's inspiring to hear that too. So essentially two genetic pools coming together from areas where they probably would never have intermingled, come together and become the genetic stock for Maine.
Right.
And then 9 years later, you were able to have a hunt. What was the population like, if you can remember, at that time?
Oh, it was...
when they opened the hunt.
There was 500 permits issued, 9 birds were...
Oh, was it a lottery?
Yep. And only 9 birds were harvested that first year. So the numbers were pretty low.
Wow. It's neat to think about.
5,000 birds maybe total. Yep.
Okay, so as we skip ahead from then, 1986, let's say up till now, 2018, what what are the landmarks that happen along the way that really stand out to you as we sort of work through that timeline? Is there anything that really stands out worth mentioning as we work our way to now?
There's a few things. I mean, the relevance to what we have now of a healthy population is, even after 1986, the department was trapping and relocating birds from that source, 111 birds from southern Maine, and bringing them to different parts of the state. So that helped.
So we trap them, bring them in, release them, trap them again, and start moving them around.
Moving within state. Yep. So that was one landmark. I think
all counties in the state now have reproductive.
Yep, but not all counties had actually birds relocated to them. So that's
so some have moved natural through expansion.
Yep. I guess the landmark, it's more of the conservative approach to having a hunting season, sustainable hunting season, is really the long-term landmark, I think. So the department has been relatively conservative in expanding opportunity for turkey hunting to allow for population growth, and that is pretty fundamental to why
to the success.
To the success. Yep.
I'm curious about that. I've hunted New Hampshire and Maine for turkeys only, so my sense of how it is in the rest of the country is limited.
Yep.
What would liberal limits look like? Because I feel like here we have 2 birds in the spring, 2 birds in the fall, which feels sort of generous to me.
Yep. Right. But it's only been since 2010
that the numbers have been that high.
So it's really been a slow progression.
Working our way up to this. Yep. And you feel the state's done a good job of being conservative about how they've done that.
Yeah, I mean, and some people may say, well, you've been too conservative, but we've also built a strong population.
Yeah.
So now we're in a different era where we can probably afford a little more liberalization beyond what we have in certain areas where turkeys are.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear a little bit about that, actually. First, let's talk about how it was received since that initial introduction. What have there must be proponents and opponents to the idea of having turkeys. I have a neighbor, Will, and what a guy. He sort of fits in that category. He's younger than me, but he fancies himself an old timer, and he talks like the old cutters, you know. And he just thinks the best thing you could do with turkeys is run them down.
Right.
And he's just always going on about it's the turkeys that feed the damn coyotes, and then those coyotes eat all the damn deer, and that's why our deer population's out. He's got one of those kind of, that hunter science, I call it. So I've heard like negatives about it.
Yep.
Most people I know seem to really like them, but I also know people who are farmers who have depredation issues and things like that. So what are the sort of different voices in the state saying about turkeys and our turkey population?
Yeah, it's a good point to raise, I think. But I should preface it by my feeling, and I think a lot of people feel this way, is that turkeys sort of get villainized and blamed for things that they don't necessarily do,
right.
Because they're the ones that you see during the day, in the morning. For example, if crows come in late in the evening or early in the morning and tear up a lawn, and they're grubbing for beetles, and then at 7:30 somebody wakes up and has coffee on the porch, and they see turkeys just scouring their lawn, eating these. It's not just the turkeys.
Right.
I mean, there are relevant concerns to landowners about turkey damage, and we have things in place that you can address that at the individual level. But so the voices are vocal minority. There used to be a lot of contention from dairy farmers about turkeys eating silage in the wintertime.
Okay.
And the concern was they're defecating in the feed.
Okay, yeah.
And potentially
contaminating the food source,
and salmonella was a big concern.
Because the birds carry salmonella or a percentage do.
The percentage do, and that was something that we looked at, and also New Hampshire looked at. They sampled 425 turkeys associated with dairy farms during the winter. This was probably 8-10 years ago, and they didn't find any residual signature of salmonella in any of the feces that they sampled.
And did I read something like 8% of birds? Correct me if I'm wrong. I was looking at it. I thought it said 9% of domestic birds carried salmonella and 8% of the wild birds, something like that.
That was from stuff that we did in Maine. So we did some sampling of turkeys in Maine associated with dairy farms for domestic and wild turkeys. And what we found was, I think it was 7%. I think 7%. 7% of wild turkeys have what we found was had been exposed to salmonella at some point
they
in
had
their
markers
life.
of exposure.
Marker, yeah, but we actually, when you have a bacteria like salmonella and you're looking to see if it's actually active, you take a petri dish and culture it,
right,
and try to grow that bacteria.
Right.
And of the samples that we took, we couldn't actually culture salmonella out of these turkeys. So, but if you look at their exposure, I think it's the DNA exposure, they actually had been exposed at some point in their life.
But weren't chronic carriers
right,
of it.
Exactly. So, and actually was really, we haven't had a lot of concern from dairy farmers since then.
That's died down.
It has died down.
What about now? What are the concerns people have? It's hard for me to picture because they seem so innocuous to me.
You can have like specific examples of like a strawberry farmer.
Okay.
What they do, strawberry farmers do is they put hay on their strawberries right and time it so that the snow comes in and then so they can cover their crop over the winter to protect it. But if you put hay down with seed and snow doesn't come for 2 weeks, turkeys will come in and eat the seed and then scuff off that cover of the strawberry plant. So we've had a couple folks actually concerned about that and had real issues with that. Right. So you deal with that on a specific level. They're just like a few examples of, minor damage to cars and things like that. One woman had turkeys, like, for some reason they wanted to hang out on her BMW. So they were scraping the paint, but I think what happens is...
I had problems like that.
Turkeys, then somebody speaks up and for a while there was a vocal minority of people that were going to the legislature and saying turkeys are this big problem. There's too many out there, and I think it was just fueled by this perspective that they were the ones on the landscape damaging. Mm-hmm. And then you mentioned interactions with other wildlife. There's some concern that turkeys affect deer populations. They eat the deer food. That causes.
At some level, they do have similar diets.
They have similar diets, which is actually, when you think about it, they're both generalists. Mm-hmm. So if there's an abundant resource like beechnut or acorn, they're both going to do well. And if that crop of the year for acorns or beechnut is low, they're going to try to eat other things, but they're both going to respond kind of the same way. So when you look at like southern Maine, there's a lot of deer and there's a lot of turkeys, so they coexist well. Mm-hmm. Places that there's fewer deer, there's not many turkeys. So
it kind of negates that theory.
Yeah, and you can, it's an urban myth, and unless you have a 10-year study that shows, 100% fitness of both individuals in the same area, that you're not going to convince everybody. But if you think of the concept itself, another good example of how turkeys likely don't influence deer populations is the fitness of deers. The individual fitness of deer hasn't changed over the time that turkeys have been here. So if there was a real concern about deer health and effects of turkeys in places that there are a lot of turkeys, you should see individual deer like malnourished and things like that, and you don't see that. So
we had a experience hunting this year where we kind of come through the forest to the edge of a field and sort of popped in, and there must have been 4, 5, 6 deer feeding, 3 toms displaying, a whole bunch of hens. It felt like we'd popped into like a Disney Bambi scene where it's just like the lights shining down and they're all sort of coexisting in there quite beautifully. So that's interesting. So a lot of the issues people have taken with turkeys are maybe not so founded in anything.
Yeah, it's not like they're not rampant issues. They're individual issues. And I think the other thing that we recognize and feel that is relevant to turkeys is they're new on the landscape. So the memory of turkeys isn't here. Mm-hmm. And so people are still kind of getting adjusted to what it means to have turkeys out there. And if you think of it in that concept, I think there's a level of a need for education about things like do deer and turkeys, do turkeys affect deer health and things like that. So that stuff has to kind of get out there.
When you look at you've been involved in, I don't know if you authored it or you've just been involved in the management plan.
Yep. I helped write it. There's several other people. Yep.
Okay. So when you look at where you're at as a department, as an agency with turkey management, looking back through time, particularly I see this in fisheries because I've read more about it, but you see decisions made by agencies in the past that now are just like, it's absolutely shocking mistakes that were made due to a lack of knowledge and data and I guess experience and maturity. Yep. And now we have different ways of managing. And I'm thinking a lot of, like, for instance, with the Sebago Lake, where, introductions of lake trout affecting and smelts affecting the whitefish populations in negative ways. Yep. When you look at what you guys are doing with management plan now, where do you feel we're at with a scientific understanding of how to best manage these birds?
We're at the beginning, really. And there's been a transition of this conservative approach, which, because we didn't have a lot of information about turkey biology specific to Maine, we sort of kind of went on whatever data was available from other states as we kind of learned and how to manage the program in our state. So now that we're sort of, and it's apparent when you go out on, any given day, you might see a group of turkeys. But so we're in this new phase where we're actually, and that's part of the research project that we're doing, is we're collecting baseline data on turkey nesting ecology and survival rates and how densities of and disease interact and things. So we're really at the beginning stages of having a data-driven system to look at if there are, I shouldn't say overabundance, but if there's a level of turkeys that could afford more harvest, that we'd have data information from this research that we could say, okay, we have a good population. And the other motivation for this research is to get a solid population estimate at the wildlife management district level, so more site specific, I guess, not just because right now we just have a statewide estimate.
Yeah, how do these estimates work? I'm always just blown away when I read these estimates and I go, like, how is it possible?
Oh, that's one of the biggest challenges with wildlife biology.
It's got to be,
because it's part guesswork, part founded in data and how those interact, and then weather comes into play and all that. So right now our basic population estimate is just taking the spring harvest and multiplying it by 10.
Really? It's that simple?
It's that simple. All things being equal, which they never are, hunting pressure, weather, climate, and that kind of thing. That seems to work as a good trend
Okay,
tracker.
So when I look at the population, I can, right out of that, divide by 10, and I get the annual harvest roughly.
Yeah.
Oh, exactly. that's interesting. Okay.
But that's good at a statewide level.
Yeah.
If you start truncating it down to like a district.
Because you must have much greater harvest in the south.
Exactly. So it's not representative of what's going on within your district. It's more a statewide level.
Okay.
So if we wanted to set seasons, which our intention is to address, because there are concerns about higher densities of turkeys promulgate disease, things like that. And there are...
Is that data driven, or is that just a concern that's raised? That the idea that where there's greater density, there's disease?
That we have information about disease in 2012 and 13 spiking in greater areas of greater density areas of
Specifically
turkeys. What? Avian pox was one where we saw.
Is that limited just to birds, or is there any concerns for people and interaction?
No concern to people, but it is birds. Other species get pox, but there's different strains. Right. So the concern really wasn't that turkeys are going to spread it to songbirds or herons.
More the impact it has on the population.
But it could, and also domestic birds.
Oh, right.
There was a concern. We didn't actually find any linkage yet, but that's something we're looking at. So I know we're getting off track a little bit, and I'm sorry about that.
Oh, no, you're doing it's great. I got so many questions, and it can lead so many directions.
So going back to this statewide estimate, that's okay. How are turkeys doing in Maine? Well, our harvest is 5,000 to 6,000 a year. That doesn't change much by maybe 500, 800 birds a year. So you can look at a general stable trend over time across the state. But if you have an area where we think you can harvest more, but you need to actually have better data for that specific district to start setting different season lengths and bag limits where places that we think can afford more. more harvest.
I didn't mention this early in when we were talking about your background, but you were also on the technical committee for the National Wild Turkey Federation.
Yes.
As well.
Yep.
So you're working alongside with them. Because that brings up a question for me too, which is that I have seen, it's hard for me to say. I'm an adult hunter. I've only been learning in recent years, so historically my timeline isn't great, but it seems to me that there's a big push right now to promote turkey hunting. I see from outfitters like Cabela's and Bass Pro Shop really ramping up the amount of equipment and how they're promoting the idea. A lot of really fantastic work by the National Wild Turkey Federation. I'm curious, is the state also wanting to promote Maine as a destination for turkey hunting, and how much is coming in from other places as well? Or are we talking largely about resident hunters, or are we seeing a lot more non-residents coming in?
Yeah, that's one of the things in the management plan is to try to promote turkey hunting, because it's a pretty good resource for Maine.
Yeah.
And also potential influx into the economy if you bring out of state. So there's a lot of interest of the Canadian Maritimes people up there that are actually coming down right now, cool. and doing turkey hunting and so that's one of the.
Is that why we regulate them as big game? They're not regulated as small game. I guess they sort of occupy this in-between zone, but it makes sense to me if you regulate them as big game, that then you have the tags and the ability to like sort of run that economical model better.
Yep. Yeah. Right. Because then we can have a more accurate data-driven management system,
as opposed to small game, which you don't really tag.
Yeah, you don't tag.
Exactly. Yep. So, also, I'm curious about looking at population trends. Yep. I'm hearing a conversation nationwide about turkey numbers. It seemed like we were in this heyday, infinite growth paradigm with turkey numbers, and now I'm hearing more conversations about drops in the population, though they seem pretty subtle to me. And I'm curious, when you're looking at those, the overall trend, do you feel these are normal vicissitudes of that happen over time, or are populations coming down a little bit?
Well, that's an interesting idea too. Is places like New York and Pennsylvania feel like their turkey numbers are steadily declining from what the heyday you refer to as, and so they're starting to regulate their fall seasons more.
Which is an either sex season like here,
right? And that's the season that you can affect your actual population. If there's a certain number, 8% or something, of if you take more than 8% of your female population in the fall, you can start to affect the trajectory of the numbers.
You get into that compensatory.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. Or the additive.
Yep.
So, so places like New York and Pennsylvania are starting to see that. They're getting more, trying to get a better handle of what their fall season should be, so they can maintain the levels that they have. Maine is, and the thought is that it's an effect following restoration. So we're about 10 years behind New York and Pennsylvania with their restoration. So there was, the theory is that there was a spike, or that heyday of turkeys is when they kind of hit the landscape
boom
at first.
Happens,
there was a boom, and now they're kind of regulated by
capacity.
Yeah, exactly. So so with Maine, I think we're still
at that plateau.
We're actually at the plateau.
Oh, okay, got it.
Is what the thought is. So we want to get ahead of a decline in order to get better at regulating our hunting seasons. So
I hunt with the goal of subsistence. I like to eat wild game, and therefore I participate in the fall hunt because it's another great opportunity to get, I find that's like, you don't want, if you eat red meat for a few days, it's like, I kind of wish I had some fish, or eat that for a couple of days. Like a white meat's nice. And for turkeys, I can cycle meals in pretty nicely throughout the year.
Yep.
But I find when I talk to other hunters about the fall hunt, they just couldn't be more disinterested. They're more focused on deer or migratory birds or whatever it is during that time. So I'm curious how much participation there is in that hunt. Is it mostly guys out there deer hunting and has an opportunity at turkey, or are there many people who go out there really with the intention of harvesting? And do you think that, I'll add one more piece to that, do you think over time, if we see a continuing declining trend in the population, would they shut down the fall hunt, or would that ever be regulated to bearded birds only?
So there's a couple questions in there. In terms of the fall hunt participation, it's more. I think it's more opportunistic, but I think there has been a sort of a rekindled interest in fall hunting. It's a different hunt, as you probably know. You're not calling birds in, and you have less response. I don't know how you hunt in the fall, but
man, I'll either go after them, but usually because I see them and I'll spot and stalk them, or I like to squirrel hunt. And I'll bring a shotgun on my back, and I'll bring a 22, and if I come across them, which I often do, then I'll take them that way.
So that's likely more of what we see in terms of the fall participation is opportunistic. People are out doing something else, or so there's that aspect of it.
Any sense of what the harvest is like?
Yeah. So we tag birds in the fall as well. So we've had, I think it's over the last 3 years, it's been 2,700, 1,800, and 2,900.
Okay, so a little less than half of what.
Yep. Yeah. So and that's increased since we've expanded the season to 5 weeks. So it used to be 4 weeks with a bow and 1 week with a shotgun. Now it's 5 weeks with a shotgun. So I think that we've seen that increase in harvest because there's people out there having more encounter opportunistic, interaction with turkeys and
during times when they can take the birds.
So when they're grouse hunting or whatever like that. So, that's sort of the fall season. There potentially could be a time when the first thing we would do is we would restrict the number of birds in the fall. So if you have 2 birds in the fall, which is either sex, we'd go to 1.
Okay.
I guess you do. I don't know if we'd restrict bearded versus not versus just closing the season.
Yeah, because the hunt is different. It's harder to get into bearded birds.
Yep.
So you would be able to, one variable you can change is number of birds.
Yep.
Another variable is length of opportunity before you need to start regulating bird sex or whatever.
Yep.
But at this time, the state feels good about the fall hunt still?
Yeah. Yeah, because our general trend is relatively stable.
And then when I hear there was a couple articles written this year that I saw, it looked actually more like one story circulating through a couple news outlets saying that Maine could get more liberal, but about it wasn't clear in the article. So I was like, is this talking about length of season? Is it talking about bag limits?
Yep.
When is there talk about at the department or at the agency about opening it up?
We're not saying anything specific because we don't really have anything specific yet. But the concept of managing at a wildlife management district level, there's 29 in the state. So the concept of liberalizing either an additional bird in the fall, likely it would be an additional bird or something like that. So those are the kind of the things that we're thinking about.
Got it.
But it has to be. It's going to be a few years before we see that because it's going to be driven by the data we're collecting now.
That's great. Yeah.
So,
shifting gears a little bit, you mentioned to me before we started recording that you became a hunter as an adult as well, and I'm curious a little bit. Do you hunt turkeys? Is one question I have for you.
Yep.
Yeah, and then, all right, I guess I'm going to give you like a multi. You don't have to answer each question exactly. More like I'll give you the trend. Yeah. No, just to get I'll give you this. You just sort of respond to the gestalt of the whole thing. I'm curious about how your work as a biologist, specifically working with nesting sites, tagging birds, capturing birds, and all that, intersects with your ability as a hunter. I would imagine you have a dramatic advantage that...
I would think so.
Yeah, I would hope so.
Yep.
And I'm curious what feedback and input you might have for people who, especially people who didn't grow up hunting, who want to get into it, and so not looking necessarily to give a leg up to those folks who are already out there, been hunting their lifetime, but people who are coming into it about how they can, and not just for the sake of harvesting birds, but more for the sake of making connections with the landscape and the species and learning how to be good stewards of that resource. What input do you have for people who are getting started so that they can learn to be successful and also learn how to be good managers at the individual level of the resource?
Yep. I could just speak from my personal experience.
Please do. Yeah.
And you talked about the advantage I have trapping and pursuing birds as a wildlife biologist and learning about and being successful in harvesting birds or other animals. But the reverse is really also at play, is that I've learned a lot about biology and behavior that helps me with my job by hunting too.
Yeah,
so there's two things going on, which is really interesting and cool. But I guess, personally, if someone's just coming into it and they have an interest in either turkey hunting or say duck hunting, just get out there, and you maybe don't even have to bring a gun the first time, but just spend the time in the habitat. So, for example, a duck hunting, get in a canoe and kind of slink through the grass or the marsh and just sort of observe and pay attention. Bring some binoculars, start to identify different species, and then, I think that's the best way to get started. And then, and it's a good way to, if somebody, because if you don't grow up hunting, you're always in the back of your mind having a play on, what am I doing? Is this, how does this fit in with how I, my core functions in the world? That happens with me anyway. But somebody that maybe is struggling or questioning whether that's something they really want to get involved with.
Are you hinting around like ethics there, or okay?
Yeah,
particularly, I think if I would expand on what I think you're saying is that a lot of people who consider themselves lovers of the environment or caring and want to be stewards of ecosystems are sometimes at odds with the idea that taking something off the landscape can benefit the landscape, or they can be contributing to something. It's interesting because everybody has to eat, and therefore that food has to come off some landscape somewhere.
And you probably think about it a lot more than, I was sitting with a fellow biologist that, from day one he grew up, they went grouse hunting and they went duck hunting. To him, it's just something he does, and he accepts it, and he appreciates it for what it is and the value. But so it's
I think a lot of people have seen so few wild animals in their life that they think that that's all there is, and they imagine that when they take some, they're having these dramatic impacts on the population. Because as I understand it, turkeys, we talked a little bit about it before, but they are heavily preyed upon, correct? I mean,
they are.
What is the mortality like? Predation mortality and I guess winter kill and all that.
Sure.
Like how dramatically are they reduced?
I mean, turkeys don't really live very long. They live maybe
3-4 years.
3-4 years. A 5-year-old bird's really old. Yeah. So, but they reproduce a lot of offspring. So, you think about right there. In order to have that short lifespan, there's a lot of pressure on you. Rephrase that question.
I guess how heavily are they preyed upon? Yeah,
pretty heavily. And I can speak from our research project. So
please,
March 22nd, we trapped our last group of birds down in Gorham, and so we had 15 transmitters on birds.
How are you trapping them exactly?
We bait them with corn.
And then into a trap?
Into either underneath a net that drops or a rocket net that fires over them.
You have a rocket net,
It's kind of,
That's like a kind of a dream that I have, is to have a rocket net.
Yeah, so that's how we trap them. But end of March, we had 15 in Gorham that had transmitters on.
Okay.
And now we have 6. So,
oh, wow.
So that's, we've lost 9 in what?
Specifically hens.
Specifically hens, yeah. So,
okay.
And hens have a higher mortality because they're sitting on nests now.
Okay,
so we've actually had what I think is, I didn't see it, but a coyote or a fox actually pull a hen off of a nest and rip her off. And
who are the primary? So coyote, fox.
Yep.
Who else?
It depends on the life stage. So so for adults now it's coyote and fox.
Bobcat.
Bobcat. Yep. If there's bobcat around.
Fisher.
Fisher could do that. Yeah. Any of those small mammals that are kind of slinking through the juniper or whatever like that. So, and that's for adults. And then you get into once you're a poult, which is a young turkey, then you have owls can take them, eagles.
I hadn't thought about avian predators.
Hawks and things like that. So, and that's more to the younger.
They must be so susceptible. I mean, because I've noticed they're not very wise when they're still poults. They seem to just sort of be
they're just kind of
following
mom. They can't fly yet, so they're ground based for the first 2 weeks of their life.
Okay, so they can get picked off somewhat liberally.
And even those mammals mammals on the ground can pick off poults too. Mm-hmm. And then even prior to that, egg robbers like skunks and crows and ravens and things like that, because turkeys actually lay an egg once a day. before they start to incubate.
And what would be a full clutch?
12 to 15 eggs.
And that's when she'll start to sit on that.
So for 12 to 15 days, she's putting an egg in a day and then leaving the nest.
Yeah.
So if a crow finds that nest, then they're.
What is she looking for a nesting site?
They tend to be close to open edges of fields that we're finding. We're not finding hardly any nests that are like surrounded by acres of mature forest. It's more that because they want to be close to that open field
breeding area
for when they're young hatch. And
okay.
Because they're eating insects primarily, and they get a lot of insects on those field edges and things like that. But they're looking for, like we found some nests that are under small fir trees that are surrounded by raspberry bramble, things like that. So there's good cover. But it's close to an edge, I guess is what we're finding. Yep.
Yeah. And for the listeners who haven't thought it through, they are ground nesting birds, of course.
Yep.
Okay, so I got you off topic before, and you were talking about your experience coming into hunting as an adult. So, how has your success been, and also I'm curious what your tactics are as well, or what you'd want to share about them.
Sure. I can tell you turkeys. Actually, I started hunting waterfowl really 10 years ago when I started this position. And then I sort of slowly got into turkey hunting. I wasn't really actively pursuing it. It was more of an opportunistic. I have a shotgun walking through the woods and I'm enjoying the day and maybe I'll see it. And I took 2 turkeys in the fall 4 years ago. So that was the first time I actually took a turkey. And that was just an opportunistic fall hunt. And then lately, last year was my first successful spring hunt. And my tactic was I don't know if you've seen a wingbone call.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep. Yeah, sure.
So I used a wingbone call, which is another story that was carved and given to me by one of the division guys in North Carolina because I interact with them at the waterfowl meetings, but because we're talking about turkeys. But so I use a wingbone call.
So for people listening, that's made from the wingbone of a turkey.
Three portions of a turkey wingbone, sort of like slid together and made about 6 inches long. And then you suck on it like a straw and make the hen noise, basically. So that's what I've been using and been successful at. And I wake up early in the morning, and generally what I do is where I know there's turkeys over the course of the year, either through just biking and hiking and things like that. Then I'll go out early in the morning and walk and call until I get a call back, and then I'll just sit down, put a decoy out, and hide in the woods.
Wait for him to come
in. Yep.
Yeah.
And
you find yourself in the woods more than at field edges and things like that?
This is a power line or field edge.
Yeah.
Yep. But so that's my tactic, really.
Yeah.
Yeah. And this year I went out at noontime because that was the only free time I had. I did get 2 birds this year.
Oh, great! Congratulations.
I just went out at noontime and I knew there was birds up on this gas line right away. And just walked up there and kind of started calling until I heard something. And actually, I didn't hear any call back. The first time I got out, I just sort of crouched down on my one knee and then called, thinking, oh, maybe I'll get a response. And a tom came out, full red head, but didn't make any noise. And so I was like, I wasn't hidden. I didn't have a decoy out.
Right.
So he just kind of ambled by and I missed that opportunity. But then I sat back a little bit later, about an hour later in the same area and did the same thing. So
same bird came through?
Nope, 2 different birds. But I called and there was no call response. They just quietly came
through,
in. But I had a decoy out. So
I find, having spent the last couple of years trying to learn, I guess, turkey talk.
Yep.
There is, it's challenging to find good vocabulary breakdowns as you try to learn that language. Yet, my experience is you don't have to be very good at it.
Right.
The toms seem to respond to just about anything. I mean, of course, you've seen where it's like you slam your car door and they respond to it. But you get out in the woods and you don't have to be that good to get them to come in. I'm just curious if that's your experience. And have you been able to pick up on more nuance being close to birds? A lot of hunters maybe not getting as close to birds as you are on the regular. Do you feel like you have a better sense of how hens are communicating, or do you learn more about that through hunting?
I've learned more about that through hunting.
Yeah.
Yep, because it really depends on the time of year that you're interacting with them, because they change quite a bit from hunting season to fall to winter, and their behavior is very different. So, and I don't think, like you mentioned, I don't think there's any magic call that and what I think is I hunted with the guy that actually gave me the wing bone call, came up from North Carolina. He was here for some other reason, but we went out one day and we just kept saying to each other, yeah, if you call and nothing happens in 10 minutes, they're either not responding or they're not here. So you move on. So yeah. I guess that's one piece of advice I would give somebody is, if you're really trying to get a bird in the spring, don't wait for 2 hours in the same area.
Yeah.
Keep moving.
Run gun.
Yep.
I'm curious, and we'll wrap up soon. I really appreciate your time today. But
sure.
Take us through quickly, if you would, the year of a turkey, because the spring hunt, it's such an otherworldly experience when they're out there gobbling, right? And then the rest of the year, kind of what is going on? And I'm particularly interested in the male-female dynamic that's taken place in the spring.
Yep.
You see a lot happening over the course of years hunting, but I don't necessarily always fully understand exactly what's going on. For instance, after they get together, what is she going right off to lay? Like, what's happening there? So if you wouldn't mind, start us just before the spring season begins.
Yep, sure. I guess before the spring season begins, birds are coming out of being in a winter flock, which consists of males and females, both young and old, all together. And I assume that's because of safety in numbers.
Yeah,
would be my thought.
So they're foraging together,
roosting together. When we were trapping this winter, we had groups of 25 to 30 to 40 birds that were all kind of grouped together in the same roosting area.
No issues with toms and jakes, poults. Everybody's just happy together.
If there's a pecking order, it's in place and it's understood.
Okay.
And then the breeding season comes on and hormones kick in, and that's when you start to see hens actually start to separate from the flock. Everybody kind of breaks up. Groups of young males will hang out with other young males, and older toms will hang out together or alone. And they're separating so that they can express their dominance. And
last year's poults are now early jakes who are going off on their own and leaving the hens solo at this point.
Yeah, I mean, and they want to breed too by year one. So, and when you talk about them going off, they're really actually all staying probably pretty close to each other.
Oh, okay. So the whole community's moving.
I mean, you have, like, we saw hens mid-April, they started to move away because they were starting to kick into nesting season. They were going to get bred, and then they were going to separate, and one or two might go off together, but generally they're alone going to nest. So there's a period where females are getting fertilized, that they're kind of hanging out with a few dominant males. They might spend a week or two with them, and then you'll see younger males sort of coming in and trying to take the opportunity to fertilize.
If they can jump in there.
If they can get in there.
Right.
Yep. So it's to their benefit to kind of keep them in view but at a distance.
On the mechanical level, what's actually going on, anatomically with the male and the female bird, how are they actually making that happen?
Copulation?
Yeah.
Yep. I mean, that the basic structure of a bird is a cloaca, right?
Yeah, it's like a vent, basically.
Yep, a vent. So everything
happens from there.
The Latin for cloaca, or the Latin meaning for it's a Latin word. Cloaca it's common sewer. So everything happens from that hole. There. Yeah.
Okay, so are they just lining those up?
So the female will be down on the ground. Yeah. The male will be on top, and then they'll just connect that way. Okay. So they line up their cloaca, their vents, basically.
And what happens next? Because is she able to hold on to semen from multiple toms, or does she? Okay.
She can store sperm.
And can she determine what sperm fertilizes her eggs, or do you know?
I don't know that. Okay. I know that she can store it, but I don't know. I believe that she can actually reject sperm. So
that Jake might get in there, but he might not really.
And she might already be fertilized, or she'll say, or I believe that she can actually reject any sperm through mating.
Okay, and I've seen hens in the spring from roadkill where it appears they have staged out.
Oh, okay.
Right? So she's got eggs at different levels of readiness, essentially processing through her body at that time?
Yeah, because they're consecutive laying events, so one day after the other. So
So she'll be in the field, she'll get fertilized, and then she'll head off.
Right, and then you'll start to see lone hens,
Yep.
and they start to disperse and kind of head out and look for a nesting site. And that's actually what happened in mid-April when that dispersal happened. Is we lost a lot of birds because they were crossing roads and things like that, but as either one or two hens by themselves. And then the males sort of, now that they've bred, they're still keyed up, but the hens aren't there to breed. And then that's when we time the hunting season, so they're still responsive, but hens have been bred.
Oh, so by the time the hunting season's happened, there's already eggs in nests.
That's the key. That's the
to good management. That's
to good
the key.
management, right? And that's
I didn't realize
part
that.
of the research is we're trying to dial down what the average period of when they actually sit on eggs and incubate, so that right now we go.
So they're not being disturbed and kicked off their nests by people.
Yeah, or
but also, so the
breeding.
toms who were taking out of the population have already had time to spread their genetic material too.
Right, exactly.
Oh, that reduces any sort of. I mean, that makes me feel even better
yeah,
about it.
So
you know?
you're taking toms that have likely already fertilized hens for the year. So.
Okay, and so then, at what time does the hatch begin?
We had hatch end of May is kind
okay. So the season's just starting to wind down,
Yep.
and I imagine. From what I can tell, most of your hunters are out opening day, week one, and as time goes on, it's really the people who are real dedicated to it that are sticking on to the end anyway. So you must have a lot less people out in the woods. And you start off, it's that first week is so nice. There's no mosquitoes yet, no black flies. And then come the end of that first week, this year, I mean, I remember being like, oh, okay, they're starting to come out. Ticks are starting to get more intense.
Sure.
So I imagine that keeps a lot of people from wanting to spend a lot of time in the woods too. So by the time they're starting to hatch, the season's winding down.
Right. Yep.
Okay.
So you're less disturbance on the young
and then at what point what are right now as we've come to the end of the month, right? So we're into June now.
Yep.
What are those toms who are so aggressive and so territorial? What are they starting to do right now? Are they still in that state?
Yeah, they'll stay in that state for into mid-June, really. And then sort of their need to breed kind of kicks away, and then they just sort of stay segregated. And
because I see them in like bachelor groups in the fall,
right?
And the hens are with poults in the fall.
Hens are with poults, which are males and females. Obviously, they're young. So the breeding season occurs, summer happens, and then you have those either you could have successful hens grouped together, 3 or 4 that have poults. Sometimes an unsuccessful hen will meld in with them, but you generally have these brood flocks or breeding flocks separated by non-breeding flocks of females that may have failed. And then you have those bachelor groups, like you said. And then they sort of transition into the fall as the poults grow and winter's coming on. Then they start to come back together again. So
for that winter time. Where they're in those big groups.
Yep. So
any and no pressure on this if it doesn't come to mind, but any books, websites, resources, I'd recommend people take a look who hunt at least here at the management plan. It's that was actually, I looked at a management plan that looked like almost like a PowerPoint presentation, very easy to go through. But any resources you'd recommend for people who want to learn more about turkey ecology or life history or the hunt itself?
Have you heard about that documentary, My Life as a Turkey?
No.
That's a good one.
It's a film?
Yep, it's a film.
Oh, great. I'll be watching that.
Raised a flock or a group of wild turkeys. They imprinted on them, and he lived with them for a year, I think. So I think it's called My Life as a Turkey. So in terms of like turkey biology and behavior, that's probably a good place to start. Yep. Anything
else you'd want listeners to know about turkeys in general, about being good stewards or anything like that?
I guess, like I was kind of getting at before, in terms of people that are starting to get interested in turkey hunting and still kind of weighing what level of comfort they have. If you go out and even without a gun and sit and try to call turkeys in, I think that's kind of a good start into understanding and appreciating turkeys.
Yeah.
I guess our intention as a department is sustainable, wise use of a resource. So we have a resource of turkeys that we want to maintain and continue through time immemorial. And, whether you think they should be harvested or not, we're trying to do the best job that we can do to make that available to people ultimately. So we feel like we're on the right track, and it's just going to take a little bit of time to develop a sort of a solid management system to do that. Yep.
Seems like you guys are doing a great job. I mean, how do you feel about, last question, like how do you feel about the long term of it right now at this point?
Yeah, I'm pretty excited about it personally. I mean,
seem like it.
We've gone from a conservative approach to more data driven, which is going to be more challenging, obviously. It's because, wildlife biology is not an exact science, and you have to kind of balance everything. So, but I feel like we're on the right track. We've got good partners, like the Turkey Federation and other folks that were on that management plan subcommittee. So yeah, I feel pretty good about it. Yep.
This is great. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed podcast. You can help us grow the show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.